All right. Well, we are moving along in our Bible study in Exodus, and tonight we are looking at Exodus chapter 16. And you might think, because of the subject matter, it's all about bread, it's all about feeding ourselves, but there is a much, much richer lesson to be learned here. And I think it is critical for us to understand that. In fact, what we're going to see from what God does with the manna are many biblical principles at work. One of those is that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Now, that's not in Exodus 16, but the principle is there. Uh, Also, the idea that God saves us and then teaches us how to live. We're going to see that. But it's much deeper than even that. It's really about how much do you trust God? I mean, really, how much do you trust Him? When things look bleak, when the cupboard's bare, when things are not the way you would like them to be, do you trust God? That's what we're going to look at today in Exodus chapter 16. So, with that, let's have a word of prayer and we'll dive in. Heavenly Father, Lord, once again, we do thank you for your word. And Lord, we thank you for the fact that you want to develop a deeper relationship with us. You want us to trust you. You want us to not just take a leap of faith, but you want us to believe that you love us and that you will provide for us. Lord, I just pray that we would understand these things correctly. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let me hit the right buttons here. All right, Exodus chapter 16, verse 1 starts out, and they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin. Interesting name, right? Which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. All right, so it's been about a month since God set them free from Pharaoh. It's been about a month since they saw the Red Sea open up and swallow the rider and the horse. It's been about a month that they've gone through all their supplies. Again, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people, if not well over 1 million people. And so they brought a lot of things with them out of Egypt, but you can only carry so much. And they probably had about a month's worth of supplies, probably thinking that the journey would take a month. And so the month is up and their food has run low. And so they start to panic. The God who opened the Red Sea, the God who set them free by plagues, including the death of the firstborn, is he able to take care of these people? Well, that's the question they're asking. So, verse 2 says, Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, Oh, that we would have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. All right, talk about drama queens, having a little melodrama. Well, you know, it's kind of interesting how the memory works. Here we see a biblical example of selective memory. They don't say, oh, if only we had stayed in Egypt where we were slaves and trying to make bricks without straw. No, that's not what they remember. They remember pots of meat. They remember having more food, bread, meat. And they're like, we don't have that. God, you just took us out here to kill us by hunger. And let's face it, we can all have our moments of that melodrama, that over exaggeration. And, we do this to ourselves. The bank account gets low and there's too much time between zero and the next paycheck. Maybe the refrigerator isn't as full as we would like it to be. It's outside of our comfort zone. And we panic and we start to exaggerate things. Or maybe it's legitimate. Maybe it really is that bad. But that's where they're at. They're grumbling, they're complaining. They're telling Moses and Aaron, oh, we had pots of meat and we had bread to the full. I mean, we never went hungry in Egypt. Really? As slaves, you never went hungry. Pharaoh never cut back your rations to get you motivated to do what he wanted. That never happened? Really? No, you're always full. Always had full pots of meat, lots of bread, till you couldn't eat anymore. Yeah, right. I believe you. All right, so verse 4 says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. Now, it's an interesting thing. There's no law given yet, right? We haven't reached Mount Sinai. It literally says they're between the two places. They haven't arrived at Sinai. There is no law given. Or is there? Is there a law given? Look at the next verse. It says, And it shall be on the sixth day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So already we start to see the beginning of a law. We see that God is telling Moses and Aaron about the Sabbath, reminding them that when God created everything, he rested on the seventh day. He took a day off. And, this is something that Christians today argue about. How do you keep the Sabbath? Should we keep the Sabbath? Aren't we under grace? Do we really have to keep the Sabbath? You know, and a lot of people get really worked up about it. And it's understandable, but notice that the Lord is saying that he's going to give them bread from heaven, but that its purpose is not to feed them. Its purpose is to test them. It's to test whether or not they will keep his law. Now, understand, we think of law as the Old Testament. We think of law as the Ten Commandments, and that certainly is law. We think of statutes, the same thing, coming from Exodus and Deuteronomy, Leviticus. We don't think of the law as God setting the parameters. He's about to lay out the instructions for how they're going to gather this manna, how they're going to keep this manna, how much they should get. And he's also going to tell them about a day that they're not going to be allowed to gather it. So he includes the Sabbath in the lead up here, but he's going to include some more details that are going to be important. And it's going to be interesting to see how well people follow instructions. That's what the test is. All right, I'm going to give you the bread, but I'm going to give you some restrictions, and I want to see whether or not you'll listen to me or not. All right, verse 6 says, Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Wait, what? You didn't know when he split the Red Sea? Well, they're reiterating this, that God's behind this whole thing. Verse 7 says, And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? Also, Moses said, This shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Okay, so again, the complaining. This is going to be a constant theme for the next 40 years. Poor Moses, poor Aaron. But they're going to have to listen to these people complain for the next 40 years. And they're making it clear, hey, you're not complaining against us. Look, these aren't our decisions. We're not the ones that led you. We're not the ones that have the pillar of fire and the cloud by day. We're not the ones providing that. You know, it's God, it's the Lord. And so, why are you complaining against us? Yeah, God's speaking to us and through us, but you should not be complaining to us like this. Verse 9 says, Then Moses spoke to Aaron, say to the congregation of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. All right, so again, this continues this idea that they've been complaining, they've been grumbling, they've been getting rowdy maybe. And, not only have Moses and Aaron been hearing it, but the Lord hears it too. The complaining is just becoming incessant. Verse 10 says, Now it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Now that's an interesting statement. So up to this point, you've had the fire by day or by night, right? And you've had the cloud by day. But occasionally, you also see the fire in the cloud. And here we have the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. So it must have been very apparent that this wasn't normal fire or even supernatural fire, that this was the Shekinah glory of God shining through. And that's giving emphasis to who the complaints are really against. Because again, Moses and Aaron are making clear you're not complaining to us, you're complaining against God. And so God is making it clear that he hears the complaining. And so he shows off his glory in the cloud to such a degree that everybody understands that it's the glory of the Lord. So that's setting the stage. Verse 11 says, And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. All right. So God's making it very clear. The meat's coming from me, and the bread tomorrow morning is coming from me. All right. Now, this is a little different than what we read about later. So, for the most part, we only see a few different times where God gives them quail to eat. And remember, we're talking a lot of quail in order to feed roughly 1 million people. That's a lot of quail. But God can do that. God can provide enough. Now, there's a later instance where they complain so much that God's like, fine, I'm going to give you so much meat, it's going to come out through your nose. And it does. So, but this isn't that instance. So we have verse 13 says, So it was that the quails came up at the evening and covered the camp. All right. And then in the morning, the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there was on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they did not know what it was. Now, we often don't know what to make of this when we're reading it. There's been many a time that I read this and I think, okay, even after I read this little bit about being like fine as frost on the ground, I still kind of picture this as, like loaves of bread showing up. But it literally is something they've never seen before. And they don't know what it is. And for 40 years, they don't know what it is because they're going to call it the same thing. They're going to call it, what is it? I remember As a kid, there was a candy bar called a whatchamacallit, but this is a what is it? so so they don't know what it is, but apparently it's fine. Um, it's compared later in this chapter to coriander seed, so a very small, fine, uh, almost like a grain, but it says fine as frost. So again, they have to go out and they have to gather this stuff that is very fine, like a seed or like frost, and gather it and then turn it into something that can be eaten more readily. So, or it continues, and Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer for each person, according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent." Okay, so the men are supposed to go out and collect this. What is it? This manna. And notice we weren't really told this before now, but apparently they were told this before, that this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. So, see, there's a command. We often overlook this, and God's commandments, God's statutes. But the command was that let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer per or for each person according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. Okay, so in other words, about an omer is going to fill up a person. And we later find out what an omer is. It's still something we don't understand. But it's enough to feed a person for the day. And so what God is saying is you only need this much. It'll fill you up. You don't need to be greedy about it. Take according to the number of the people in your tent. So, if you got 2 kids, 5 kids, if the mother-in-law is in the house, gather 1 omer for everybody, for each person. But you don't need any more than that. It'll be fine because you'll get more tomorrow. So that's the situation. Verse 17 says, "Then the children of Israel did so and gathered, some more, some less. So when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and uh, he who gathered little had no lack. Every man had gathered according to each one's need." And, this is something that we talked about in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, that God provides according to the needs. So everyone who gathered uh, much, they had nothing left over. And everyone who gathered little had no lack. If you're like, I don't think I need a whole omer, I only need like 3/4 or half an omer, you know, they were fine. They didn't have any lack. They were filled with what they got. And so I was just going to roll over, this program Logos says that an omer is a unit of measure equal to 1/10 of an ephah. Well, that's helpful. Used by the Israelites to ration manna in the wilderness. So, in other words, we don't really know for sure how much this is, but I would assume, we're talking like, a couple cereal bowls worth. So, anyway, the idea is you don't need to get greedy about it. Don't need to over collect. You just take what you need for today. So, verse 19 says, "And Moses said, let no one leave any of it until morning. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, but some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them." So, again, this is something you see people do all the time, right? When there's a big sale of something, do they just take what they need or do they load up? You know, there's a great deal going on. It's not going to last very long. You know, you especially when it comes to food, it's got an expiration date. Do I really need a gallon of milk that's going to expire in the next couple of days when I can only drink, a quarter to a half gallon in that amount of time? I probably shouldn't get a full gallon if I'm not going to drink it. You know, and this is something that you see people struggle with quite often. The sense that they're going to miss out, that they're not going to have enough. And I get it. We have this tendency to prepare. They call them preppers. The big thing's coming. Whatever it is, it's going to be big, and the food supply is going to be shut off. You're not going to have anything, so you need a whole uh, bomb shelter filled with food that's vacuum sealed and will last for 50 years, just in case. And look, there is something to be said for having backups and, living away from a city as we do, having some backups in case something happens with the weather and you're not going to be able to get to town and go to the store as regular as you would like. Buying a little more that would last makes sense. But in this case, Moses specifically says, uh, let no one have or leave any of it until morning. Gather what you're going to eat it, toss it out if you can't eat it. But people being people, some of them, not all of them, but some of them left part of it till morning. Well, guess what? They got to find out why. The Lord had told them not to do that. So they wake up and guess what? They got worms in their tent and it stinks to high heaven. You wake up, oh, wow, what is that? Maybe it even wakes you up early because it smells so bad. It doesn't really say how bad the stink is, but I can assume it was bad enough to get people's attention. And Moses is rightfully angry. He's like, what are you doing? Do what you're told. Remember, this whole thing is a test to see if the people will do what God says. That's the whole point. Will you trust God for tomorrow? And that is the point of this. It's not about the food and it's not about the commandments. It's really about the trust. Do I trust God that He says, take only what you need? Don't save any of it. You'll have more tomorrow. Do I take God at His word? Do I really believe that? Or am I going to run out? Am I going to keep looking at, the things I've stored up for a rainy day to make sure it's still there? Every day I got to go look, make sure it's all okay. Or do I trust God? It is a difficult thing. Let's just be honest. It is difficult to trust God for your daily bread, but isn't that exactly what Jesus taught us to pray? It's one of those connections. Jesus is called the bread of life in the New Testament. And as the bread of life, He also makes it clear that we ask the Father for our daily bread. So that's our physical bread as well as our spiritual bread. We're supposed to trust God and believe that He is our provider and that we can trust Him to provide for us. But some people don't. And they're the ones that end up with a tent full of worms and stank. All right, verse 21 says, so they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. And when the sun became hot, it melted. And that's the other thing. Get up early, get to work, get it done, because when the sun comes up, it's going to melt like that frost, and you're not going to have any bread. So you need to do it when God tells you to do it. So there are these parameters that God is setting up in giving this manna. I want you to only take what you need, not save any, rise up early and get it before the sun comes up and gets hot, because it's going to melt. And there's another one. Verse 22. And so it was on the sixth day when they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." So this is one of those things where the Jewish people to this day, those that are very religious and keep the Sabbath, they do all their cooking and baking the day before so that they don't have to do it on the Sabbath. And this was something that Christians did in the United States for a very long time. Many of the stores all across the United States, not all of them, but many of them, would be closed up on Sundays. Why? Well, they saw Sunday as the Sabbath. Now, you might argue whether that's right or wrong. That's not something we're going to discuss today. But what is important is that the restaurants, the grocery stores, and, a lot of other stores would close on Sunday. And so you just make sure you had what you needed. So you would do a little extra grocery shopping the day before. If you needed something that would spoil pretty quickly, like a loaf of bread back in the day, whether we're talking milk or something else, you would get a little extra the day before Sunday. So on Saturday, you'd get more than enough, and you just didn't go to the store the next day. A lot of people just went to church, even the store owners and the restaurant owners. And people just understood that nobody was working today. We all were going to church. That was an important part of our society. And it recognizes God's provision in our life. And the idea is to take our mind away from the physical. When the Bible says that it is the love of money that is the root of all sorts of evil, it's not so much money as it is stuff. It's okay if we forgot to go to the store and the stores are closed on Sunday. We can do without. It'll be all right. We can take a break from some of these things. And that used to be what we did. Oh no, I didn't go and get whatever I needed. And so, we just understood that there wouldn't be anything. The store wouldn't be open on Sunday. You couldn't go to the restaurant on Sunday. Today, we go 7 days a week. And it's more and more difficult for people to take time off of work because we just keep working. God meant for us to rest. And that's what he was teaching the children of Israel. All right, verse 24 says, "So they laid it up until morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it." That's because God gave them a different rule, different commandment for the sixth day. And Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none." And of course, people don't always listen, right? People don't always listen to the commands of God. They don't always listen to what the instructions are. And so what happens? Now it happened that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh. And look, this took some getting used to. They weren't used to doing it this way. I mean, you ever think about that? When we first start these things, oh, wait, God said I'm not supposed to work on the seventh day. Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to hoard it. So you learn it the hard way. Oh, I got stinky manna and worms. Oh, I didn't gather anything yesterday. We don't have any manna today. And, you know, the Lord is like, how long are you going to not listen? And that's the question. Are we willing, as believers today, are we willing to listen to God when He says take a day off? Are we willing to listen to God and do it His way? About a lot of things, not just this. All right. So, verse 31 says, "And the house of Israel called its name manna." What is it? "And it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey." That tastes pretty good. That sounds pretty good. Verse 32 says, "Then Moses said, 'This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" Now, this omer of manna is what ultimately ends up in the Ark of the Covenant later on. All right, so verse 33, "And Moses said to Aaron, 'Take a pot and put an omer of manna in it and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations.'" Verse 34 says, "As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, an omer is 1/10 of an ephah, which still isn't much help if you don't know what an ephah is. But the point is that the children of Israel continue to eat this for 40 years. And many of that generation didn't learn the lesson, as we're going to see as we continue through. But this did set the stage for the generation of faith that Joshua leads across the Jordan River to start taking the land of Israel. They learned to depend on God. And I bet you 40 years later, it was probably a little disconcerting that first day in the land of Israel that God didn't provide manna. Wait, where's the manna? Oh, yeah, we're here now. The fact is that this was God teaching His people to depend on Him. And look, the fact is, we can depend on our employers. We can depend on the government. We can depend on our savings, whether that be an actual savings account, an investment account, an IRA, a 401k. All those things are fleeting. Here today, gone tomorrow. Yes, you can build up wealth for yourself and for the next generation. But that's a dangerous thing for one very simple reason, because we forget to depend on God. You see, whether you have a pretty much non existent bank account or a big, hefty bank account, if you don't depend on God, you lose so much. You lose the cornerstone of faith. Remember, Jesus quotes from this time and quotes from what the children of Israel are told later. When Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy, He says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Look, it's nice to be fed every day. I know I'm a big fan. But if we miss a day, if for some reason the food stops, do we still give thanks to the Lord and ask Him to provide our daily bread? Do we trust God when things don't seem as certain? Or do we panic and act much like the children of Israel? Start hoarding stuff, start being stingy, start panicking that there won't be enough food. And that's the spiritual lesson of this chapter. Exodus 16 is not about the bread. It's about whether or not we trust God. All right. Well, that's tonight's lesson. Until next time, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with others. And may God bless you. And have a good night.